right. Now, in this third recording for the chapter, we're going to be going over some of the divisions of the nervous system. And so this is, again, continuing with sort of this theme of how these various components of our body and our brain interact. So you remember we started the chapter talking about the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. And so we're revisiting this again here in much greater detail. So we have the brain and the spinal cord, and now you can see what all of these various parts of the spinal cord connect to. So we have the brain, and this is most likely going to be aspects of your brainstem, because you can see some of these sort of like very basic sort of core functions, and sort of right up here. And this will be connecting with all of these various pieces. And you can see that it's not really necessarily organized by, sort of structure of the body per se, although kind of, the bottom here is where you have some of your, like the bottom parts of your trunk. And, but then here you have all the organs that it connects to. And these are particularly important because these organs are doing particular things within your body. And if you increase your heart rate or decrease your heart rate, it prepares you for things. If your stomach is active and eating, then there's not supposed to be certain things that you would do, like jumping jacks, that would disrupt things. And so where other times you want to inhibit, so there are times then you want to be active, you want to not necessarily have your stomach be active, you want to inhibit those pieces. So this is where we get into more of this space now. The peripheral nervous system has these two basic parts: the somatic peripheral sort of nervous system. This is aspects of where conscious muscle movement occurs. And so this would be, me engaging in any of these sort of behaviors, reaching out to grasp someone's hand for a handshake. These are muscle movements, and they're somatic. And so those are intentional. And that's, like I talked about a little bit earlier, where you pick up the cup. I'll hold it back. There we go. And this conscious made muscle movements of sort of confirming, what you're holding. And so these, you have your, you need your peripheral nervous system for that, but this isn't sort of these instinctive, automatic, non-consciously controlled elements. The consciously controlled elements is sort of these somatic pieces that you'll be able to sort of feel and direct. And then you have your autonomic nervous system, which is not consciously controlled, although there's things that you can do to influence it. And this has two parts called the sympathetic nervous system, which is the fight or flight, and sort of the high arousal system that responds in times of stress or duress, danger. And then you have the parasympathetic nervous system, which this is active in times of low arousal, or when someone is trying to recover from a stressful event. Then it will sort of shift from the sympathetic nervous system, winding down to the parasympathetic nervous system, actually picking up to try to engage sort of these low arousal processes and restart some of these organs that would be working during times of lower arousal. So before we go here, we will talk about these spaces more when we get to these particular sections. So for now, it's like knowing these sort of basic components and these elements of what the central nervous system is, what the peripheral nervous system is. We'll get back to some of those details later on when we're looking at, for example, when we get into stress, or when we get into the chapter on digestion. All right, so the other parts, again, of this sort of central nervous system, peripheral nervous system, is we have these 12 cranial nerves. And so this is, again, this is in the head, but these nerves are primarily for sensing aspects of information about what the various components of your face and head are doing. And so some of the most important, sort of well-known ones, I should say, are the olfactory nerve. So this brings, information in regarding sort of these olfactory chemical senses. Then you have the optic nerve. So this is the olfactory nerve right here. This is on the bottom of the ventral side, the bottom side of the frontal cortex, and they sort of sit right here in these little in aspects of these little grooves. But what you also have is the frontal lobe. It sits sort of right here above your eyes, and in this sort of area right here, and which would basically correspond to this section on here, there's actually bone underneath it that's sort of supporting this sort of front area. And that bone is called a cribriform plate, and it's actually quite like jagged. And so this is one of the spaces where you can have um, like head trauma, instances of traumatic brain injury where there's a sort of a shearing sense sort of right here with multiple concussions and things like that. And one of the ways that you can catch or notice this is oftentimes after periods of brain injury, individuals can lose their sense of smell or have it impacted. And that's because these nerves here have been sheared and broken. It's really hard for these things to, they don't necessarily regrow. When they're impacted, damaged, you have a stroke, and they sort of, say some of those ways. Only certain types of nerve tracts are able to regenerate. And then you can see here the various ones, sort of your ocular motor. But this is aspects of your eye, so you can think of your ocular and sort of moving. Your trochlear nerve, this would be a trigmental, and then abductens. These are all elements in aspects of sensory motor and chewing. Then the vestibulocochlear nerve. This was one in terms of balance. This is what I thought the cochlear was actually slightly catching me on right up here. And these are from elements of your inner ear canal that you would use for balance. And when these get thrown off through the sensory spaces there, then you can have, some of these balance disorders. And then this is also how alcohol can cause sort of like balance issues, or pretty much any substance that has those effects. Then you have the glossopharyngeal, and this is sensory information from the head and neck, including the middle ear and tongue. So you can have that, some of those areas, the pharyngeal, the sort of that space in it refers to aspects of your sort of throat and mouth area. Then you have the vagus nerve, and this is a very long, important nerve that affects the parasympathetic nervous system, and it controls the heart's, lungs, and digestive tract. And one of the really important spaces about this, because it has all of those things, it's very key in aspects of some of the sort of calming processes that, in terms of being connected with the parasympathetic nervous system. So this is again would be the sort of the calming elements of recovering from a fight or flight. And so basically trying to sort of activate this nerve sometimes through different types of breathing exercises or stretch exercises, or a number of ways that have been sort of purported. You want to be careful with looking into which ones are sort of actually meant to be more helpful. And that does not necessarily mean just an internet search for influencers. And but you can actually find strategies to sort of activate this. And one of these is various breathing techniques. Is sort of like a box method. And you can look that up. That will activate this parasympathetic nerve and actually sort of calm your body and try to activate those calming pieces in those moments of stress. And so looking into the space is this is an area right now where people are actually trying to engage this cranial nerve for the sort of the parasympathetic nervous system effects it has. And then we have our accessory nerve, the neck and rotating. Sort of those pieces. Not sure if any of the recorder actually caught the fact that my neck cracked at that. And the hypoglossal, this is the muscles of the tongue. And so mainly you want to be familiar with these. Some of the main sort of dominant ones that are sort of the most important, the olfactory, the optic aspects of sort of the ocular motor, facial, the vagus nerve. So some of these pieces, more than anything, you want to be familiar with this material. But the exam does not require you to know the definition of each and every one of these. Okay. That doesn't mean don't study them, but I mean, you just don't have to know them in that way. All righty. And then now we're going to look a little bit, we looked closer at these sort of cranial nerves, and now we're going to look a little bit closer at the spinal cord. And you'll see some of the sort of directional elements that we discussed earlier. And then this has sort of the sensory information and the somatic information here. So this is a portion of a spinal cord. This, again, right down here on this bottom side is the ventral root of the spinal cord, and this up here are these dorsal roots right here. And these are particular neurons that are actually combine these. And so we have information that comes in through the skin, from the sensory neuron. It has this space here where it comes into the dorsal root ganglion, and this enables some like really rapid sort of processing if you were trying to have like a reflex arc and some of those types of things. And then it continues into the dorsal root into the this dorsal portion of the spinal cord. And then you have the same thing that you can be happening here on this side in terms of this is aspects of viscera and sort of even intestines that you're going to have like sensory experiences. This is going to be coming in here. Again, it's sensory information. And then it's going to come in through your dorsal root ganglion and dorsal root, and then, connect and interface with these pieces. Now, here you will also see basically, again, this information that is coming out of the spinal cord. Okay, so this would be afferent, and this would be efferent, exit, afferent, access. And so you'd have this information that would be coming down the spinal cord to activate a skeletal muscle or something like that in response to a stimulus event. And so this is how these instructions would come down, covering some of the same pathways and intersecting with the same neuron to coordinate this information quickly. And then we have here, you can see, so here you have, this is somatomotor neuron for controlling, and then this is just wanted to add that. And then this here is a pregonomic neuron, and preganglionic neuron. And so this would be one that is going to be potentially giving information or that would affect the lining of the stomach walls. Okay, so this could, we're not using the lining of the stomach walls, but meaning sort of like the aspects of the contractions or some of those spaces that would go in and be involved in digestion. And this would likely be sort of an unconscious process. So so part of the autonomic nervous system, again, where this is the somatic nervous system, this would be the autonomic nervous system. It's going to be sending information down from the brain. And here it's going to be intersecting with and the other neuron sort of space right here. So, and this intersection point, you can also have intersections or meetups with sort of other with other neurons sort of in this similar area or having some of the same effects. So here you can just basically see the flow of information. The incoming sensory information is the same, whether it's stuff that you are conscious of, whether it's stuff that you are not conscious of. It basically still follows these same pathways. But then you're going to have different instructional pathways to for somatic motor neurons, where you're going to have controlled things, and then more of these autonomic neurons where you're going to have involuntary control. Like, we don't sit there and actually think about our digestion in terms of like, go for the carrot first, you know. All righty. And then we've got the cerebral spinal fluid and ventricles. These are some of the final pieces in this area, and they are in here in these internal structured pockets. And cerebral spinal fluid, also known as CSF, it's clear liquid, and it's made by the choroid plexus. You do not have to know that. And it removes waste, and it's found in the spinal cord and around the brain and in the ventricles. And you need to have enough cerebral spinal fluid flowing for the sort of cushioning and waste removal. And if you have changes in your or infections in your cerebral spinal fluid, it can obviously have quite disastrous effects. And then you also have your ventricles, again, which are these sort of inside open pockets, these spaces within the brain. You have these two lateral ones right here. And then you have your, okay, there you're going to say there's your third ventricle, which is this medial one, and then your fourth ventricle, which is this other thing here. And this will then go down into your spinal cord, where you're going to have the cerebral spinal fluid in your spinal cord as well. So these are connected, and these spaces, again, they provide an element of cushion, and they are critical for keeping these areas clean, free of waste, and kind of providing this, I guess to a certain extent, sort of protective lubrication. And taking a step back, if we're going to look, this is what's on the inside of these ventricles. Now we're going to transition to looking at these outside, what's going on the outside of protecting the brain. So you have the meninges, that these basically wrap around the brain and provide some of these protective layers. And here you can see where this is a section of right here. And here you're going to have your skin, and this would be, these are some of the pieces, your upper hemisphere, posterior hemisphere, here's your bone. And in this space right here is where you're going to have some of your meninges that are going to be providing the protection between your bone and the brain. So between this very, very hard surface and this super, super soft surface that's also like extremely sensitive. So first you have the dura mater, and this is the thick outer meninges layer against the skull. So that's right here, okay? And then you can see how some of this would also go, like this is going to be going right in between the brain, that you see this point right here. So again, you're going to have this travel between these spaces, you know, and hence that's where aspects of the ventricles are as well. And then you're going to have this thinner space right here. This is the pia mater. This thin membrane follows the contours of the cerebral cortex. So it basically kind of goes around some of these layers and really focuses more on wrapping around the brain. And then you have the arachnoid, which is a web-like membrane between the dura mater and the pia mater. This contains the CSF and the blood vessels used to wrap around the brain. So you see here, this is sort of this is the dura mater. Then you've got this sort of in-between layer right here with all of these sort of structural pieces. Here you have the pia mater all the way right here again, going just up against the cortex. And these this sort of structured lattice work, you know, this is what gives blood to the brain. This is where you're going to have aspects of the blood-brain barrier sort of being in place, where at this point you can, you know, it's past that, it's in the blood-brain, it's within the brain, and it contains the sort of cerebral spinal fluid that protects all of this. So this here, the combination of these things is sort of like this cushioning between these hard spaces in the skull, excuse me. And that is the end of this third section of chapter 2. And next will be the fourth and final section of chapter 2. Thank you guys for listening. And next we will basically be heading on to the brain anatomy. That's right. So we're going to be going over one of the, what are the pieces of the brain, such as the frontal lobes and stuff, and the temporal lobes, and some of the things that I've been talking about as we've been going through this. Right. Ta-ta.